Summative review of Unit 3, Constitution to Federal Period. Essential information. First, to define a constitution as a framework for government. After America's independence from Great Britain, the country entered the so-called constitutional era when the United States needed to create a framework for government. Americans made 2 attempts to establish a workable government based on Republican principles. First, American political leaders, fearful of a powerful central government like Britain's, created the Articles of Confederation. These were adopted as a framework for government at the end of the American Revolution. The Articles of Confederation, our first framework for government, provided for a weak national government, gave Congress no power to tax, Congress had no power to regulate commerce amongst the states, provided for no common currency, gave each state 1 vote regardless of size, and provided for no executive or judicial branch. When the Articles of Confederation proved to be too weak, there were plans to have a constitutional convention. This was in 1787 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They were there to discuss plans for amending or changing the Articles of Confederation. When the delegates met, however, they decided the Articles were too flawed and there was a need for a brand new Constitution. George Washington presided as president of the convention. Although he seldom participated in the debates, he lent his enormous prestige to the proceedings. James Madison, another Virginian, was a brilliant political philosopher. He often led the debate and kept copious notes of the proceedings. These notes have become the best record historians have of what transpired at the Constitutional Convention. At the convention, James Madison authored the so-called Virginia Plan, which proposed a federal government of 3 separate branches, legislative, executive, and judicial, and the Virginia Plan became the foundation for the structure of the new government. James Madison, because of his influential role at the convention, is called the father of the Constitution. What were some of the key issues and resolutions at the Constitutional Convention? First, what about the rights of the states versus the power of the new national government? The answer to this is that the power would be shared between the states and the national government. However, the federal law, the national law, would be supreme when constitutional, but it otherwise gave the states considerable leeway to govern themselves. This is a system known as federalism. Secondly, what limits the power of the federal government, especially if the federal government is the supreme law of the land? Answer: the federal government power is limited to those identified in the Constitution. See, before we said it's the supreme law of the land when constitutional. If it is unconstitutional outside of the framework for government, it is illegal. Number 3, how does the Constitution provide for a limited government? It provides for a limited government by allowing the national government to have 3 co-equal branches: the legislative branch, which is Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives; the executive branch, which is the presidency and the vice president; and the judicial branch, which is, of course, the Supreme Court, the judges. Each branch has numerous checks that keeps each branch in balance. Our example in class we like to use was when the legislative branch passes a law, the executive branch, the president, can veto the law. How does the Constitution balance the interest of large states and small states? It balanced the power between large states and small states by creating a Senate where each state has 2 senators, so it's equal and fair amongst all, and a lower house called the House of Representatives, where membership is based on population. The Southern states were also placated or appeased by being allowed to count their slaves. Slavery still existed at the time the Constitution was created. Slaves would count as 3/5 of the population when determining representation in the House of Representatives. This is a chart that we used in class to organize these compromises on the key questions we just went over. Please take a second to review this material. The last part of the Constitution was to have it ratified. Ratification is the process to approve the Constitution. This had to be done in state ratification conventions. The Federalists were the group of people who advocated or wanted the Constitution ratified. They advocated the importance of a strong central government, especially to promote economic development and public improvements. Today, those people who see a primary role for the federal government in solving national problems are heirs to this tradition. Leading Virginia proponents, those who wanted ratification of the Constitution, included George Washington. Remember, he was president of the convention. He supported the new Constitution. And James Madison, author of the Virginia Plan, father of the Constitution, supports ratification of this new Constitution. The Anti-Federalists, in contrast, feared an overly powerful central government would become destructive to the rights of individuals and the prerogative of the states. They were against ratification of the Constitution. Today, the more conservative thinkers echo these concerns and champion liberty, individual initiative, and free markets. Leading Virginia opponents of ratification included Patrick Henry and George Mason. Elements of Federalist and Anti-Federalist thought continue to be reflected in contemporary or modern political debates on issues such as the size and role of government, federalism, and the protection of individual rights. So who won the ratification debate, Federalist or Anti-Federalist? Federalist. The new Constitution was ratified and became the country's framework for government. However, the Anti-Federalist insisted the Constitution include provisions to protect individual rights. The Constitution provided a system for orderly change through amendments to the Constitution itself. The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. The cornerstone of the Bill of Rights is the First Amendment. It reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances." James Madison authored much of the Bill of Rights, and he based its major principles on earlier Virginia statutes. He consulted two Virginia sources. First, the Virginia Declaration of Rights, written by George Mason. This reiterated the notion that basic human rights should not be violated by governments. Two, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, written by Thomas Jefferson. This outlawed the established church, that is, the practice of government support for one favored church. This is a chart that we did in class on the Mimeo of key people and key ideas from the Constitutional Convention. The Constitution did not provide for political parties. During the Washington administration, from 1789 to 1797, different views of economic and foreign policy led to the development of the first American political parties. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, who was our nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, And John Adams typically believed in a strong national government and commercial economy. They were supported by bankers and business interests in the Northeast. They supported the Bank of the United States. They supported the Jay Treaty, which protected trade with Britain. And they supported the quasi or undeclared war with France during the Adams administration. However, there was an organized opposition party to the Federalists that developed during the Washington administration. The Democratic-Republican Party was led by Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. James Madison has gone from a Federalist during the ratification period to now supporting Jefferson's views, opposing Hamilton and the Federalists. The Democratic Republicans believed in a weak national government and an agricultural economy. They were supported by farmers, artisans, and frontier settlers in the South. They opposed the Bank of the United States. They opposed the Jay Treaty, and they opposed the quasi-war with France. This is an electoral map from 1796 in which John Adams won the election against Thomas Jefferson. But the main point of this map is that you see from the geography of the voting patterns that political parties have already become a method of voting. The North, the East, the cities, they vote primarily Federalist. The South, the West, the agricultural part of the nation, votes for the Democratic-Republican candidate, Thomas Jefferson. Years later, in the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic-Republican Party has a well-organized opposition to the re-election of Federalist John Adams. The campaign poster reads, "Republicans turn out and save your country from ruin." They mention as part of their protest the heavy taxation, the big government that the Federalists have created. This is a chart that we did in class to practice Federalist versus Democratic Republicans. Please take a moment to review the chart.